Have you ever been in a situation where you thought you knew someone, only to find out there was so much more to them than you could have ever imagined? Well, get ready for a story that will blow your mind. Picture this. A mother, just like any other, trying to board a plane, but when she's denied first-class access, she has no idea that the person she's turning away is the one who actually calls the shots at that airline. It's a twist that's almost too crazy to believe, right? And here's the kicker. Her son? He's the airline's boss. How could this happen? What went wrong? Stick around, because you're about to find out. This isn't just another celebrity drama. It's a true life story of power, recognition, and a surprising twist that life throws at us when we least expect it. In this video, you'll see how even the most powerful people can get overlooked, and how one simple mistake can unravel a whole story that's just waiting to be uncovered. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Stay with me until the end to uncover how this shocking moment turns into something no one saw coming. You want to see how it all plays out. Keep watching, because this story is about to get even more unbelievable. The airport was bustling as usual, with travelers rushing through security, hoping to make their flights on time. Among the crowd, one woman stood out, dressed casually, yet with an air of grace. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the terminal as she approached the first-class check-in counter. She had never flown first class before, but today was supposed to be different. Today, she was flying to a destination that had been on her bucket list for years, a trip she had long dreamed of but never could quite afford. Until now. Her ticket, carefully purchased and confirmed, promised her a seat among the elite. But as she approached the counter, something strange happened. The agent behind the desk greeted her with an unusual coldness, scanning her ticket with what appeared to be more hesitation than necessary. The woman smiled politely, expecting the usual smooth service she'd seen others enjoy. But instead, the agent glanced up at her, then back down at the screen, eyes narrowed in what seemed like suspicion. Without warning, the agent informed her that her seat had been downgraded. She was stunned. But my ticket was confirmed for first class. There must be a mistake, she insisted. The agent remained unfazed, offering no real explanation, but pointing her to the gate where the coach class seating was available. She stood there for a moment, bewildered. How could this happen? She wasn't used to being treated like this, especially after she had made all the right arrangements. Yet, her concern was only just beginning to grow as she felt the eyes of those around her. And here's the kicker. She had no idea that the man who owned the airline, her son, was somewhere just a few feet away in the same terminal, in a different part of the airport, oblivious to what was happening. It was an irony too large to ignore. This simple mistake, this unknowing snub, was happening right under his nose, and he had no clue. Now, you might be wondering how this could possibly happen. How could an airline boss, someone with so much influence, be entirely in the dark about such an embarrassing incident? The answer, like many things in life, isn't as simple as it seems. This wasn't just about a mother being denied a first-class seat. No, there was a deeper story unfolding, one that involved power, trust, and a complex web of relationships that bind even the most successful to the very systems they build. The mother, though a simple woman in her own right, had always been proud of her son, and yet she had never fully grasped the magnitude of his role in the world. She knew him as her son, as someone who would always be there for her, but she had no idea that his life had morphed into something entirely different. His work had become his obsession, and in his pursuit of success, he had lost sight of the human connections that had once mattered to him most. To her, he was still the same boy who had grown up in their small home, the child who had once needed her to guide him, to be there when things seemed tough. But now, he had ascended to a level she could barely comprehend. She had no idea what his company had grown into, how much wealth, power, and influence he had accumulated. And now, standing at that counter, with the weight of his actions and decisions hanging in the air, she couldn't help but feel a wave of regret. But this was only the beginning. The tension started to rise as a woman, confused and angered, made her way to the gate, her thoughts racing. Why hadn't he called? Why hadn't he known she was flying today? Could it be that he had forgotten her? As she walked, the sound of her footsteps echoed in the terminal, growing louder, the suspense mounting. She had no way of knowing that her son was sitting just across from her in the VIP lounge. sipping his drink, completely unaware of the events unfolding right under his nose. In the meantime, the son, let's call him the airline boss, was busy with his own set of troubles. His rise to the top had not been easy. It was a climb that required sacrifices. Some he was willing to make, others that had been forced upon him by the very nature of his ambition. What he didn't realize, however, was that in his journey to corporate success, he had allowed the most important relationships in his life to slip away. His mother, once the anchor of his world, had become a distant figure, someone he didn't need to check in with because he assumed she understood how busy he was. But the reality was, he had pushed her away, just like he had pushed away many others, believing that success could fill the void that human connection once did. As he sat in the lounge, sipping his drink, his mind was elsewhere. The weight of running a multi-billion-dollar airline rested heavily on his shoulders. There were meetings to attend, deals to close, and promises to keep. His employees, his partners, his board directors, they all depended on him. And yet, there was this gnawing feeling at the back of his mind, a quiet whisper telling him that something wasn't quite right. He couldn't quite place it, but he felt something was off. He wasn't the only one with a strange feeling. The airport staff, who had witnessed the entire incident unfold, exchanged worried glances. It wasn't just the strange nature of the mother's treatment. There was something about the entire situation that didn't sit right with them. They had seen passengers get upset before, but this felt different. They could sense that something deeper was at play, something that went beyond just a mistake with a ticket. By now, the tension in the air was palpable, the mystery thickening with every passing moment. What was going on behind the scenes? How would this seemingly small incident snowball into something much larger? Why hadn't the airline boss realized that his own mother was in distress? Was it simply a case of corporate indifference, or was there something more to this disconnect? And just when it seemed like everything would settle down, the unthinkable happened. As the woman made her way to the coach section, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her son. He had just landed in another city for an important meeting and would be out of touch for the next few hours. The message was curt, impersonal, almost robotic. She stared at the screen, her heart sinking. She had been thinking about him, longing to reconnect. But this message, this impersonal message, was a stark reminder of how far apart they had drifted. Her heart ached. She couldn't believe this was happening. She had always been proud of her son. But now, she wasn't sure what had happened to the boy she had raised. Was he still the same person? Could he even see her as his mother anymore? Little did she know, her son was about to get a wake-up call that would change everything. Because back in the VIP lounge, the very event she had just experienced was about to come crashing into his world in a way he couldn't have predicted. And when it did, it would force him to confront not only the reality of his own rise to power, but also the painful truth about the price of success. As the story unfolds, you'll see how the truth begins to unravel, layer by layer, revealing more than just a mother's disappointment. The tension will continue to build, keeping you on the edge of your seat as the stakes get higher and the mystery deepens. Stick with me, because we're only just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this all plays out. As the woman sat in the crowded coach section, she could feel the weight of the moment sinking in. The excitement of her trip had been shattered, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. She glanced at the other passengers around her, some of them engrossed in their own worlds, some glancing at her with that familiar mix of pity and curiosity that strangers sometimes offer. But she didn't need their sympathy. What she needed was an answer. She needed to understand why this was happening, why her son, the one person she had always trusted, the one person she had raised to be kind and empathetic, had let her down so completely. As the plane took off, she tried to steady her nerves, but the questions continued to swirl in her mind. Was this simply a mistake? Was it possible that her son, despite being the CEO of such a huge company, could be completely oblivious to the way she was being treated? Or was there something deeper at play here, something that involved more than just an airline ticket? Back in the VIP lounge, her son was still unaware of the storm brewing in the very airport he was in. His phone buzzed with emails and messages, each one more pressing than the last. Each one reminded him of the enormous responsibility he carried on his shoulders. The numbers on his company's quarterly report were looking good, better than expected. But the pressure was mounting. There were upcoming meetings with investors, important negotiations that could decide the future of the airline. But even as he responded to his work emails, something in the back of his mind kept nagging at him, an uneasy feeling that he couldn't quite shake off. It wasn't until an hour later, when he finally had a break between meetings, that he picked up his phone to check in on his mother. He hadn't heard from her since the morning, and something about that felt off. He had always been busy, but this silence, this distance, was unlike anything he'd experienced before. When he finally saw the missed call, the text messages, and the voicemail from her, his stomach dropped. He felt a sudden surge of guilt. Why hadn't he thought to check on her earlier? Why hadn't he reached out? With a sinking heart, he listened to her voicemail. Her voice, normally warm and comforting, was strained, almost breaking. "I'm disappointed, son," she said softly, the words cutting through him like a knife. "I thought you would have been there for me today, but I guess I was wrong." His hand trembled as he replayed the message, his mind racing. He didn't understand what had happened. Had she been treated badly at the airport? Why hadn't he known about it? Why hadn't she called him directly? Suddenly, the unease that had been creeping over him took on a new form, a mix of confusion, regret, and a deep sense of dread. It wasn't just about the incident with her ticket anymore. It was about something much larger. He had been so wrapped up in his world of business, of profits and corporate strategy, that he had lost sight of the people who had once mattered most to him. He had let his success blind him to the very thing that had gotten him there, the people who had supported him all along. As the plane soared through the sky, the woman's thoughts turned darker. She had spent so many years supporting her son, watching him rise from humble beginnings to become the powerful man he was today. But now, she wondered if that man even existed anymore. Could it be that the price of his success had been his humanity? She could no longer recognize the person he had become. And as the realization dawned on her, she made a decision. She would confront him, not just as his mother, but as a woman who had been deeply hurt by the one person who was supposed to have her back. Meanwhile, the son, still grappling with the guilt of not reaching out sooner, was racing against time. His mind was no longer focused on the business meetings ahead. He needed to find out what had happened. He needed to understand why his mother had been treated so poorly, why she had felt so abandoned. But as he dug deeper, he began to uncover something far more troubling than he had ever expected. It was a whisper at first, a rumor that was circulating among some of the employees. The airline, once known for its excellent customer service, had been cutting corners in recent months. There were whispers of cost-cutting measures, reductions in staff, and a shift in corporate culture. The company had been struggling to keep up with the competition, and in an effort to maximize profits, it had started to prioritize business over people. But it wasn't just the employees who were feeling the strain. The customers, like his mother, were beginning to feel the effects too. As the son pieced together the fragmented pieces of information, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if this wasn't just an isolated incident? What if his mother's treatment was part of a larger pattern, one that had been overlooked by him and the rest of the leadership team? What if the very culture he had helped create was turning toxic, and he had been too blinded by his success to see it? The more he thought about it, the more his stomach churned. He had been so focused on growth, on expanding the airline's reach, that he had forgotten the core values that had once driven the company. Now, those values were being trampled in the name of profit, and his mother, his own flesh and blood, was a victim of that very system. In the meantime, the woman's frustration only grew. She couldn't reach him. Her calls went unanswered, her texts ignored. Was he too busy to deal with her? Was he avoiding the conversation? Or worse, did he not care enough to even check in on her? Each unanswered message, each moment of silence, only deepened her resolve. She was going to get answers, no matter what it took. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, a bombshell dropped. It came through an anonymous tip, a piece of information that would change everything. The airline, in its efforts to cut costs, had been engaging in a series of shady practices. From overbooking flights to skimping on customer service, the company's leadership had been making decisions that were affecting passengers, and not just in small ways. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The airline's leaders had been aware of these issues for months. They had known about the declining service, the rising complaints, and the mounting tension among staff. Yet, they had chosen to turn a blind eye, prioritizing profits over everything else. And what's worse, her son, the CEO of the company, had known. He had been briefed on the situation, but had chosen to ignore it, too focused on his ambitious plans for global expansion to deal with the damage his company was causing to its reputation. The twist in this story was darker than either of them could have imagined. The son had been living in a bubble, completely unaware of the cracks that had been forming beneath the surface of his empire. His mother's experience at the airport had been the wake-up call he needed, but by then it might be too late. As the tension escalated, both mother and son were about to face the consequences of their choices. Would they be able to repair their fractured relationship? Could the son redeem himself? Or had he gone too far down the path of corporate greed? And most importantly, what would happen when the truth finally came to light? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started, and the real questions are only beginning to surface. The stakes are higher than ever, and with every passing moment, the tension continues to build. What happens next will leave you on the edge of your seat, unable to look away. As the days passed, the tension between mother and son only grew more palpable. Their once close relationship now felt distant, like two strangers who had crossed paths but no longer recognized each other. The son continued to bury himself in the whirlwind of corporate life, trying to fix the chaos unfolding within his company, while the woman remained steadfast in her decision to confront him. She knew that their bond had been fractured, but she wasn't going to let him hide from the truth any longer. The truth about his actions or his inactions was something he could no longer escape. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, the son sat alone in his penthouse suite, staring out over the city skyline. The lights of the city twinkled like stars beneath him, but they felt distant and hollow, much like everything else in his life at that moment. His phone buzzed on the desk, and his heart sank when he saw his mother's name flash across the screen. It was the first time she had reached out to him directly in days. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen, before finally answering. The woman's voice came through, raw and laced with emotion. "We need to talk," she said, her words steady, though tinged with the pain she had been carrying for so long. "I'm done waiting for you to figure out on your own." The son felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to her. For a moment, he was paralyzed, unsure what to say. His mother's disappointment was louder than any boardroom meeting, and it echoed through every corner of his mind. But he couldn't ignore it any longer. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it was falling apart. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate, but all he could manage. "I should have listened to you. I've been so caught up in everything else. I've neglected the one thing that mattered most." The woman sighed, the sound of it carrying years of unspoken hurt. "It's not just about you being busy, son. It's about the choices you've made, the people you've hurt along the way, including me." There was a long pause, and for the first time, the son could hear the vulnerability in her voice. "You're running a company, but what kind of person are you becoming in the process?" His heart twisted. He had been so focused on building his empire, on scaling the business, that he hadn't stopped to think about the cost of his ambition. His mother's words stung, but they were the truth he had been avoiding for far too long. "I never meant for things to get like this," he whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." For a long time, there was silence between them. And then, finally, the woman spoke again, this time with a sense of resolution. "I think it's time you see the bigger picture, son. You're not just the CEO of a company. You're someone's son, someone's friend, someone's family, and you've been too blind to see that." The son felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of regret and determination. He had made mistakes, yes, but that didn't mean he couldn't fix them. He could still change. He could still be the person his mother had raised him to be, the person who valued relationships over profits, who cared for the people who had been there through thick and thin. And he was going to prove it to her. He was going to fix the damage he had caused, not just to his company, but to the people he loved. "I promise you, Mom, I'll make it right," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "I'll fix the company, and I'll fix us." The woman's tone softened, and for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope in her voice. "I believe you, son, but actions speak louder than words. Show me that you can still be the man I know you are. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights, intense meetings, and difficult decisions. The son dove headfirst into the problems within his company, addressing the issues that had been ignored for far too long. He began implementing new policies, prioritizing customer service, and making sure that his employees were treated with the respect they deserved. But it wasn't just about the business. He also reached out to his family, rebuilding the connections he had neglected. He spent time with his mother, apologized for the hurt he had caused, and made a conscious effort to be present in her life again. But just when it seemed like everything was falling into place, the final twist arrived. A report came through that revealed a shocking revelation about his company's finances. It turned out that a significant portion of the cost-cutting measures implemented had been far more damaging than anyone had realized. While the company had been scrambling to boost profits, they had unknowingly engaged in illegal activities to cover up financial discrepancies. The truth was out, and it wasn't just a corporate scandal. It was a potential criminal case that could destroy everything he had built. The son was faced with the ultimate test. He could either try to bury the truth, cover up the scandal, and protect his empire, or he could face the consequences and risk losing everything. It was a choice between preserving his reputation or doing the right thing. He made the hardest decision of his life. He chose to come clean. He called in the board members and executives, admitting to the wrongdoing and taking full responsibility. He pledged to cooperate fully with the authorities and ensure that the company would be held accountable for its actions. The fallout was swift and brutal. The company's stock plummeted, employees were laid off, and the media had a field day. But through it all, the son held his head high, knowing he had done the right thing. And slowly, over time, things began to change. His company was rebuilt from the ground up with integrity at its core. The relationship with his mother, once broken, was repaired as well. They had their ups and downs, but they had learned to communicate, to listen, and to support each other once more. In the end, the son realized that true success wasn't about power or money. It was about being true to who you were, about valuing the people who mattered most, and about taking responsibility for your actions, no matter the cost. He had lost everything once, but in doing so, he had gained something far more valuable: the strength to rebuild, to learn, and to grow. The final twist? The woman who had stood by him through it all had been the true architect of his redemption. She had been the one to push him, to force him to confront the truth, and in the end, her unwavering belief in him was the key to his transformation. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of inner strength and resilience. Until next time, stay strong, stay brave, and never forget your worth.